Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff McLaughlin, and I'm the Director of the Museum and the Archives here at Murray State. I'd like to welcome you for our keynote address for Voices and Votes, Democracy in America. Our featured speaker tonight is Sherman Neal II. We will get to him very shortly, but first I'd like to thank our sponsors at Kentucky Humanities. They have brought a wonderful exhibit here to Murray, and I would encourage all of you to come have a look. We're going to be hosting the exhibit until the 1st of May. We're open from 8 to 4:30 weekdays and 10 to 2 on Saturdays. The other thank you I'd like to issue here is to an absolutely fantastic crew of student workers I've had this year. History majors, Ashley Dino, David Wallace, art students, Jasmine Groves, Karen Colorado, and Lauren Hayes. I am always so impressed when I work with Murray State students, and especially with these guys. So I'm not gonna sing their praises too long. They know they're appreciated. Their work is here in the museum. They built a couple of companion exhibits, and I'm very proud of all of them. So I'm going to turn things over to Sherman, but first I'd just like to explain one thing very quickly. The decision to invite Sherman here tonight was mine. And the reason why I extended that invitation is because Sherman has been in the news, in the local news and in the national news frequently over the course of the past year. And there are so many of us who are curious. We'd like to get to know Sherman, but because of COVID, we've been robbed of the opportunity to get together and meet in person. And I know that over the past few months, there have been a small number of detractors who have been very vocal about their dislike of Sherman. And I've met Sherman a couple of times. I like him. He's a good guy. He's a great speaker for tonight. And I just want him to know that there's a much larger group of us who appreciate you and are glad that you're doing what you're doing and would like you to carry on as long as you remain in the community. So, with that said, I'd like to turn things over to our featured speaker tonight, Sherman Neal II. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me okay? Jeff, I appreciate that. No, I was trying to stay away from thank yous because the list will get too long. Obviously started with my family, but really the family that I've gained throughout the last 10, 11 months of time here, my 2 years here, but it's definitely been awesome. Built a lot of genuinely good relationships that I wouldn't have otherwise had the opportunity to. So that's been one of the benefits of using my voice in this community, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work that everybody's done by putting this together. So, to start with, good evening. Thank you for being with us tonight. I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then please feel free to ask me any questions, because this is more about, like Jeff said, trying to explain who I am and what my motivations are, and I think that's what this exhibit's about, and examining why the democracy that we have in America works the way that it does. So, firstly, thank you to the audience joining online and in person here at Rather Museum on the campus of Murray State University. Tonight's discussion will focus on my observations regarding reconciliation, education, and our democracy, and in particular, my role as a community organizer in rural Western Kentucky. Over the past year, I've had the honor of speaking to organizations and individuals spanning from Connecticut to California. Internationally, I've received input from people located in places such as France, Japan, Liberia, and I'm humbled to have been selected to speak before such a diverse audience. And the gravity of the matters that we're going to discuss tonight aren't lost upon me, and hopefully aren't lost upon you, given the climate of our nation today. I hope the words I share tonight will capture the lessons I've learned and the lessons I've been privileged to learn with and through others. So again, I'll speak for about 20 minutes about my team, my motivations, and leadership, and what I hope to contribute to the story of civil rights advocacy in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So to speak about myself for a second, so my political socialization honestly comes from the extra time that I had to read textbooks in ISS. For those who haven't been there, that's in-school suspension, where I spent too much time in middle school. The good part about ISS is that that's where they kept the extra textbooks. And if you look in the back of history textbooks, you find our foundational documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Emancipation Proclamation. So I actually performed my first oral argument as a 12-year-old before the Naperville, Illinois City Council. During one of these ISS sessions that I've been in for who knows what, I had decided that Crone Middle School had suspended my right to habeas corpus, meaning that either the charges weren't brought against me or weren't fair or weren't classified or unclear. I decided to reword the Emancipation Proclamation to free myself from the oppressive regime put in place by my middle school principals, who I apologize to profusely today. My mom actually discovered my reworded Emancipation Proclamation trying to free my seventh grade-year-old self, and she told me to present that to the city council in Naperville and bring my concerns to that body, which is a formative event for me. Didn't stop me from getting in trouble yet, but helped me to formulate, what my voice is and what it would become. The next time I would appear before a city council would be 22 years later here in Callaway County, discussing the petition for the removal of a Confederate monument. So every generation reaches a point of realization that policies that were once considered the status quo turn into intolerable acts which threaten to divide and destroy us. Politicians, political parties, political action committees spend millions of dollars to guess what those issues will be and guess how that those issues will influence our voices and ultimately our votes. In 2011, a college football teammate of mine, Reggie Doucette, was shot and killed unarmed in Los Angeles by the Los Angeles Police Department. There was zero accountability for those police officers. Shortly after that, Trayvon Martin was shot and killed unarmed in Sanford, Florida. There's zero accountability for his murderer. In 2014, Eric Garner was choked to death in New York City in broad daylight while unarmed. There's zero accountability for those officers. In 2014 again, Michael Brown was shot and killed while unarmed in St. Louis. Zero accountability for those officers. In 2015, Sandra Bland, a woman who attended my church in Wheaton, Illinois, after being issued a traffic citation, was taken to jail and died under suspicious circumstances, for which there's been zero accountability to date. After those events, I certainly used my right to vote as my expression of how to create change in prosecutors and publicly elected officials and those who vote for our laws. But now I recognize that I had a certain unwillingness to make myself vulnerable, and I perceived a lack of power in my own voice in being able to bring about tangible outcomes to those situations or rectify those situations. The events in 2020 changed that. Ahmaud Arbery on February 23rd, 2020. Breonna Taylor on March 13th, 2020. George Floyd on May 25th, 2020. 6 days after the murder of George Floyd, I penned a letter which has since led to 301 days of unrest here in Callaway County. I penned a letter about the presence of a Confederate memorial featuring Robert E. Lee located on the grounds of the Callaway County Courthouse. At the time, I reasoned that justice for all could not exist in the shadow of the Confederacy. Eliminating the physical manifestation of injustice and white supremacy would free our judges, our prosecutors, our elected officials to make decisions without bias eventually. it also would help us identify Confederate sympathizers within our government. I surmise that speaking about the statue and what they've represented would also allow me to address the systemic issues with logically sound arguments grounded in statistics, history, and well-accepted facts at this point in time, without having to engage the individuals, because it's about a system. What I have since learned is that I missed the greater opportunity that we have. The opportunity to participate in the collective test of faith, community, and our willingness to persevere in the fight to retain our democratic republic here in the United States. So, as with most things, I've tried to summon the energies of those who've come before us. And while deciding what to write or speak about today, I thought Ida B. Wells would be an appropriate representative of the movement that we have and how we've covered it. To quote Ida B. Wells, she said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And it does not seem to me that notwithstanding all social agencies and activities, there is not a vigilance which should be exercised. There is not enough vigilance in the preservation of our rights." And for those that don't know Ida B. Wells, she's a woman, a reporter who traveled the South, the Midwest, everywhere to cover lynchings and other events that she perceived as imminent threats to our democracy. I believe that Ms. Wells was speaking to our duties as citizens in a democracy. So I broke down those duties into 4 concepts and responsibilities. 1, attack everything. The requirement is active engagement and vigilance. 2, accept responsibility. The requirement is to display courage in adversity. 3, acknowledge the need to reconcile. The requirement is to become an active listener and engage yourself in a discussion of your own beliefs. Challenge yourself. 4, adapt. The requirement is to conduct self-assessment, diversify, build coalitions, and show respect to others through inclusion. These are the requirements for preserving democracy in America. Failure to engage in any of these tasks at the individual, state, and national level threatens the existence of our democratic republic. Before speaking tonight, I asked myself why the Smithsonian would expend resources to explore the relationship between voices, votes, and democracy in rural Western Kentucky. I asked myself, what is a voice? What is a vote? A voice is vulnerability. The decision to participate publicly requires individual citizens to expose themselves to having their beliefs challenged, to engage with their community, and to expose themselves to danger. A vote is faith. Participation in democratic forms of government requires faith in the outcome. The outcome does not mean victory for your candidate. The outcome is a peaceful transition of power, trust and equal opportunity, and the preservation of the opportunity to participate for future generations. So transitioning to our case study here in Murray, Kentucky, in our Confederate monument located on the courthouse grounds. In 2018, Murray State University hosted a debate for candidates running for judge executive, the Kentucky equivalent of a chairman of the County Board of Commissioners in some states, my state of Illinois. When questioned about a movement that was taking place in the wake of events in Charlottesville to remove the Confederate monument here, Callaway County candidate for judge executive at the time, Kenny Hines, seized the opportunity to make his intention to stand with the Confederacy clear by stating, "The only time it would be removed is by a majority vote of the fiscal court. I would act under their direction or in the case of federal marshals hauling me off to Paducah and putting me in federal prison. They can do what they want to after that. Kenny Imes won that election. Many thoughts and emotions on what was said only 150 meters from where I sit today, 3 years ago. To channel the words of Maya Angelou, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Fast forward to June 17, 2020. In the midst of violent action by white supremacist groups against crowds of protesters, largely consisting of Murray State students, the fiscal court, now chaired by Judge Executive Kenny Imes, decided to hear comment on the Confederate monument. Comment came in the main courtroom of the Callaway County Circuit Court. There, Callaway County resident Blake Hughes recited the now familiar mantra of the Traditionalist Workers' Party, a neo-Nazi organization responsible for the 2017 murder of activist Heather Heyer in Charlottesville, Virginia. Judge Imes made his Confederacy or Call the U.S. Marshals statement in the wake of the events of Charlottesville. Reading from a prepared statement, Mr. Hughes, speaking to keep the monument, stated, "The removal of cultural monuments is cultural genocide. No one who has spent all their lives in our community should dictate the way that we remember our ancestors' history or how we remember historical figures important to us." Hughes went on to say that the push to remove the monument was about Marxist intent on destroying history because they hate us, our nation, and our God. Notably, the squires who comprise the fiscal court chose not to address nor refute any of the statements uttered in their presence at this time. 2 weeks later, June 26, 2020, when pressed on whether the Confederate monument reflected the values of all citizens of this county and the problematic nature of state sponsorship of the United Daughters of Confederacy, a group which is closely affiliated with the Ku Klux Klan since the Klan's inception, Judge Executive Imes stated, "Who are we to judge the people of 1900? I mean, they have tried to attach it to the Ku Klux Klan. How many have gone back to understand the purpose and intent of the Ku Klux Klan?" He went on to say that everybody in my lifetime, I've never heard anybody speak well of the Klan. But if you'll go back and read, I think it was Nathan Bedford Forrest, that was one of the founders. That wasn't what it was about. So the judge executive was correct to identify Grand Wizard Nathan Bedford Forrest as the first leader of the Ku Klux Klan. I'll leave it to Professor McLaughlin here to invite Judge Executive Imes to explore the exhibit and see what the purpose and intent of the Ku Klux Klan actually was. Thankfully, we have a university here that can do that. I suggest that the purpose and intent of the Klan and the UDC and the monument itself was to revere a failed state that fought to preserve the right to enslave people. So we move on to September of 2020. A final resolution comes out about the monument that we have here today. The resolution comes at the direction of Judge Executive Imes, which is penned. The resolution itself is penned by Callaway County Attorney Brian Ernstberger, and the decision is made to keep the monument where it currently stands. In the resolution itself, though, we have hope. Hope comes in the last section of the resolution where it states, "As with all matters, this court remains committed to serving the will of the people of Callaway County. And should that will of the people change at some point in the future, the court stands ready to listen and engage on this issue." So we're here today because we're ready to engage. We hope that the vulnerable and precarious positions that citizens of this county have put themselves in over the last 300 days indicate that the voices of 1917 do not reflect the voices of 2021 and who we are and what we want to become. In 1917, those voices came from people allied with the United Daughters of the Confederacy and the Ku Klux Klan. Those groups made sure that those 1917 voices did not include those of women seeing as that they did not yet have the right to vote, and did not include the voices of black men, seeing as that the Klan's primary purpose in existence was to ensure that we could not exercise our right to vote. I'm privileged to speak here to try to correct some of the damage that was done from that time to now. So, again, going back to 2020 in June and why I'm speaking, I submitted that letter to our elected officials, essentially stating that I refuse to let one more day going without exercising my voice and my right to vote. In essence, making myself vulnerable by expressing anger with the status quo, which currently results in the justice system where the outcomes are largely dependent on race, while also maintaining my faith that we can change, and that by exercising both voice and right to vote, we can still become the country that we've been designed to be. Over the past 10 months, for me, and over the past several years for those who've been engaged since 2017 and 18, we've observed the metaphorical strain fruit born of the poisonous tree. The events in Murray became a microcosm, the same reconciliation process resulting from voicing opinions and voices at the national level. Several incidents here serve as exemplars of that. 1, violent opposition and backlash. In Murray, demonstrators withstood attacks by vehicles, chemical agents, brandishing of pistols, military-grade weapons, and terroristic threats. On June 6, 2021, America was attacked by Confederate sympathizers who assaulted and killed a law enforcement officer with chemical agents, blunt objects, and military-grade weapons while engaged in an act of terror. In both scenarios, the public officials who permitted these acts evaded any type of penalty or prosecution. Their silence continues to spur violent action in the nation and in our community. The second fruit of the poisonous tree is intimidation and retaliation. In September 2020, we watched Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron fail to secure an indictment against the officers who murdered Breonna Taylor, despite substantial evidence that should have led to an indictment. In September of 2020, the Callaway County Attorney failed to secure an indictment against the president of the Fort Hyman chapter of the Sons of Confederate Veterans for assaulting a young woman who had secured 10,000 signatories on a petition to remove this Confederate monument. For reference, at the federal level, 99.99% of grand jury prosecutions receive an indictment, a true bill. So one of two things is happening here in the Commonwealth. Incompetency by publicly elected Commonwealth's attorneys and Attorney General, or appeasement to groups that could care less about Black lives, and overt retaliation against change agents in the community and in the state. The third fruit, resistance to diversity, inclusion, and a restriction of access to our places of government. To keep it brief, I distinguish social performance from tangible action. Since March of last year, I've seen an untold number of Instagram graphics, Juneteenth celebrations, highlighting individual members that have been promoted to boards. Yet, today, as our legislature is in session, we have not had Breonna's Law get passed, whereas it has in Virginia and Florida. We had a bill get approved by our Senate to restrict the First Amendment right to demonstrate and use your voice. And at the national level, in July, we saw the former president make speaking about these monuments a felony, a heightened felony, a priority over investigating some of the events that led to the murders of people in our nation. So, to conclude, I thought I could talk about why the monument. How does that fix anything? As a young Marine Corps officer on my first deployment, my supervising officer assigned me a task that I found tedious and really insignificant, to be honest. I was charged with documenting incremental improvement to operations, which meant getting with and coordinating with Marines in various sections that were in our department to see how they improved the operations and efficiency of the unit every single day. It takes a lot to find something that you did better every single day, so as you can imagine, it took some digging sometimes. The improvements range from the mundane, creating spreadsheets to document, accountability of ammunition, weapons, etc., to the incredible. Speaking with Marines about inserting under periods of darkness into abandoned airfields in order to advise, train, and assist the Iraqi army in their fight against the Islamic State. After several weeks of putting together these storyboards, I became a firm believer in incremental process improvement. I understood that everything matters, which goes back to point number 1 of address everything and stay vigilant. For the past 300 days, I've refrained from telling people how to demonstrate, what is right, what they should write, or how they should feel. I just hope that people know that everything that you do matters. Every incremental improvement that we take towards the preservation of our democracy matters. Every exercise of your voice matters. Who does it matter to? It matters to the next generation of activists charged with preserving this democracy. It matters because the community that is stripped of one more relic of a white supremacist government is a community that's more inclusive and a better community for that. So, the monument's still there. So what does winning look like? We can't look to Richmond, Mobile, Oxford, Austin, Texas, or Louisville what winning is going to look like in Murray, Kentucky. The rural Mid-South is different. The battles are more intimate and likely won't be won by any sweeping progressive movement, at least in this part of the state. Winning in rural Western Kentucky looks like individuals allowing someone different into their town, home, and university. Winning looks like equal access on equal footing. Winning looks like a community exercising their voice and right to vote in the midst of armed men on a daily basis, whether it's a summer afternoon or a winter afternoon or a fall evening. Winning looks like sending a letter to the editor in a town where everybody knows your name and what you stand for. Winning looks like what we've been able to accomplish over the past 300 days in this community, with our collective voices and votes being heard without fear. To close with, Congressman John Lewis fought for and witnessed the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which formally disassociated the United States from black codes, Jim Crow, and other things that were the progeny of the KKK that try to restrict our right to vote. As you all know, he fought every day of his life to hold the ground gained while continuing to push forward. Today, we have the John Lewis Voting Rights Act before our Senate. So it's not the bill. It's not, his quotes. It's good trouble's good. I love that one. But what is his legacy? Bills come and go. His legacy rests with people like Senator Warnock. His legacy rests with people like the representative in Georgia who was recently escorted and arrested out of her own capital for trying to watch a bill get passed. A woman who attended the church of Senator Warnock, who had a close relationship with John Lewis. So, what does that mean here? I'm certain that John Lewis knew that victory really just meant opportunity to fight another day. I know that we'll succeed in our efforts. I also know that everybody engaged with me has made a commitment to lifelong change, becoming a change agent, because this isn't something that you can just take off. You're changed when you engage in this, and all those who have engaged know that. That's why every single person and every single conversation that you have matters. I know that the legacies of those who stand with the lost cause are going to rest with history. I also know that the legacy of our team will live and breathe and exist in the America that we craft for the future. Our legacy will exist in the next generation of the students that we see out here. Our legacy will exist in our own children. Our legacy will exist in this town because, we owe it to the people of 1917 who weren't able to speak, use their voice, and vote to rectify that situation because their legacy speaks through us. Appreciate y'all listening to me tonight. Ready for any questions?
Jeremy, do you mind if I turn the stage lights on?
Yeah, I thought y'all trying to make me look like a villain or something, turn the lights off.
So, we had the sun, and then we lost the sun, and then we were shrouded in darkness.
It's all good. Any time and place, so operating under darkness is preferred sometimes.
We have set up on our Facebook page for Rather West Kentucky Museum a Google form. If you are watching on the computer, you can bang in a question now, and we can ask Sherman to respond. We did have one come in this afternoon, and the questioner wanted to know your thoughts on the impact of laws that are being passed now to make voting more difficult and how they're going to shape future elections.
I appreciate that. So, one, it would have been irresponsible to engage in any of this without knowing what the results could and will be. I know that some of the men, some of the people that are affiliated with this monument, some of the people that are affiliated with these bills have power. So even when you achieve, a small victory, you should be prepared to see the same tactics that were employed by groups like the UDC. So, for instance, if we have a bill in Georgia where you're strict getting water, should that be expected? Absolutely. We know that if we have historical turnout, people that are in power are going to do anything they can to maintain that power. We should be prepared to assist those. We should have anticipated that, and we have anticipated that. When you talk locally, and this is one of the things I've struggled with, honestly, is that there's the impact of victories here and the impact of this movement eventually are going to fall disproportionately on the people of color that have been here for as long as this community has existed. Should I leave and something happened to them out of retaliation, then that's my responsibility. Does that mean don't engage? Absolutely not. But you at least have a duty to think about that. I mean, we've seen it in real time with, the prosecution of a student here. And so we're prepared for that. The nation should be. The nation's pretty resilient. And we just have to make sure that, the organization doesn't stop when you get the small victory because retaliatory acts are coming. Hopefully that answers the question.
Well, we have a very small group, a skeleton crew here in person. Is there anyone in the audience, all six of us, who might want to ask a question of Sherman Neal while we've got him?
Yep.
Jasmine?
What changes do you think could be made to public education, especially grade school, to help children better understand democracy? Or do you think any changes need to be made at all?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you asked that because this time last year, Admiral McRaven came to speak to the university. And right before he spoke, he said something I found very interesting. He said that the gravest threat to national security in the United States right now is K through 12 education. So, and that's been the number one thing that I've learned through this. And an example of how I've learned is one of the coaches on our staff who was trying to help me understand, Deep South a little bit better. He went home to Alabama and actually bought back one of his mom's textbooks. And he was like, read this. And I read it and I thought it was insanity. And then I paused and I realized that every single person that I'm speaking to has been educated on this lost cause myth, 3-4 generations, how many are alive now. And so objective number one is to stop that. The immediate way to stop that is that you remove anything that's a lie. And that goes to attacking everything because it all matters. The second part of that is to physically show people. I found that to be the best means of doing that. Now I'm talking about older people when you talked about K through 12, but the same thing with the kids. So like I know for myself, my parents took me to Springfield in Illinois on trips, and I got to see where Abraham Lincoln was lying at rest. And I also read about the things that he said. And one of the things that we do here and why we have these statues is we talk about the great men, which means that they're infallible. When in fact, they're people just like us. I'm sure that there's flaws in John Lewis's life and Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, just like Abraham Lincoln wasn't exactly, proponent of freeing people. General Sherman, was not, even though he issued the field order to give 40 acres to enslaved people. So I think by telling the truth, and which is a hard commitment in some places, we can move towards fixing the educational system. I'm not going to say I'm an expert on that, but I know that telling the truth is the first step. And I think that's what we've engaged in over the last year here. Does that answer?
Yes, sir, thank you.
Yep.
Do we have any others? Okay. Can I ask one?
Yep.
If you were to make a suggestion for a replacement statue, what would it be?
John Morant. And, I thought, so to go back on that, so early on, one, it's been awesome to see what people create. Like, I'm not an artist. If you notice, I send like long-winded documents half the time that cite things that, people may not read. But really gaining an appreciation for like art and what it means. And somebody sent me a Photoshop picture of John Morant on top of the statue instead of Robbie E. Lee. And at the time, I just thought it was funny. And then over the past several months, I've really thought about that. Before the event where there's the March on Murray, where there's hundreds of people that largely consisted of students, a student-led movement to the statue, I read about John Lewis being 25, I believe, when he gave the speech at the March on Washington. And it made me think about what I did at 25. And I thought about John Morant and the decision at 21, he might have just turned 21, to enter into the fray in a place that was a safe space for him, knowing what the result can be. And that's the model of what this community is. He came here from South Carolina, was welcomed by the community, got educated, was loved by the community, and because he cared about the community, he said something, potentially risking endorsements, career, much more than I'm probably risking right now. And so, why not? I also think that another appropriate one, when we get to telling the complete story of the truth, Murray and the battlefields around here, specifically Fort Donelson, played a big role in the post-emancipation of formerly enslaved people. What do I mean by that? Fort Donelson, which is located roughly 25 miles from here, a Union victory, the place where General Grant gave his unconditional surrender edict to the Confederacy. After the battle, the enslaved people in the surrounding area went to that place and made it their first home as free people. Immediately after they were freed, their first acts were to do two things. One, defend that home against Confederate sympathizers and other people. And then 2, enlist in the Union Army. Their first acts, and really it's been a hallmark of the black existence, is to defend what you have and then join. And when we get to, democracy in America, and I talked about your voice being faith, or your vote being faith, and your voice being vulnerability, I can't begin to imagine, the amount of faith and willingness to be vulnerable it would take to immediately turn around, turn back south, and participate in the defeat of the Confederacy. And so any one of those soldiers, and I've seen in Savannah, Georgia, they had one about a Haitian unit that did the same thing. Any one of them would be an exemplar of what we should revere as a truly American story. Does that answer somewhat?
We had a question coming in online. And the viewer asks if you could give a brief summary of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act.
So, okay. So, in 1965, so let's peel it back, and if they want to cite me on it, they can. It's good. I'll learn from it. So, after the passage of the 15th Amendment, the 14th and 15th Amendment, black people had, the largest amount of representation that they've ever had in government. As a result of that, and really post-Reconstruction and removing the military from the South, you saw things like black codes, the voting taxes, etc., and grandfather clauses, stuff to keep them from voting. And so as we got into the 1960s and we realized, or really President Johnson realized, that in addition to the Civil Rights Bill, he needed to pass something to preserve the rights of black people to vote. They passed the first Voting Rights Act. And I believe it's Section 5 of that act puts in place a monitoring system for mostly southern states that had a history of preventing voting. Recently, I can't remember the exact year, but a couple of years ago, the Supreme Court decided that Section 5 was no longer necessary to protect the black vote or protect minority vote. And so now the Senate, or Congress in general, is trying to take legislative action to rectify that. Because when the Supreme Court made its decision, it was talking about, the court's responsibility to determine how, why, and where, these states should monitor the Voting Rights Act. And so now we're trying to craft a legislative solution to doing that. And that's just how, Congress works. Hope that answered his or her question.
There was one final one here, and I think it's probably a good stopping point. It says, direct quote, "Not a question. Just wanted to thank Sherman for his important work and talk tonight. You're a blessing to Murray. Thanks for working for change."
I appreciate that, and I'll give that to the people doing work. Yeah, I appreciate that. And like I said, it's if there's anything that anybody can take from this is, I probably just made a mistake explaining the Voting Rights Act. That's good. That's part of the vulnerability that I was talking about. I can tell you, and it's going to seem like a not important, but important. When I went home over Christmas, I logged into my Xbox for the first time, and I was going to play Call of Duty, and it looked at the date of last login, and it said May 31st, 2020. The letter came out on June 1st, and I realized I hadn't done anything else for 6-7 months at this point in time. And I was just a guy, enjoying COVID nothingness, probably drinking a beer, playing video games. And then tomorrow, it's, hey, what do you do, community organizer? And I say that to say that can be anybody. Every single person has the ability to do this. And I've seen that, and that's been the only thing really that, keeps me going doing this, because it's been awesome to see that. And I hope that's what, everybody realizes. I don't hope, I know that that's what's taking place. And I, again, with the legacy, I know that doesn't die. That doesn't need a statue. That lives within us and in these places. And so I think that's pretty awesome, and I appreciate that.
All right.
Thank you. Y'all have a good night.